Hello and welcome. We're moving from our section on Buddhism last week into our section this week on Christianity. We're getting one particular person's vantage point of Christianity, right? So we're reading, remember, looking at what does sacredness look like within this tradition. What is the human quest? Who are we as humans, and what sort of state do we find ourselves in? What or where are there movements towards justice? Working for the benefit of other people, the common good, right? That is indigenous to this religious tradition, right? And so our focal point in this next week is Howard Thurman, and I briefly introduced him in week one. And so what I want to do is give a little bit of his bio, his background, to help better contextualize his ethos as a writer, and then I want to just point out a couple of things to make you aware of to help guide our readings through Thurman and our conversations as they begin to unfold throughout the week. So biographically, Howard Thurman, he was born in the 1890s. His grandmother was an emancipated slave. She was the property of the plantation owner, and she was freed under Lincoln in the Emancipation Proclamation. Thurman grows up in Daytona Beach, Florida. So they've got these races, that stretch back even then, and he talks about that in the interview that I give you. His mother is a devout Christian. His father has no use for Christianity. He rejects Christianity, and there's various points in Thurman's own life where he follows more in his father's footsteps. But he comes back to Christianity because I think, this is my interpretation, his grandmother possesses this dynamic spirit, dynamic relationship with her own faith that brings him in and anchors him to his own Christianity. He was born in the Deep South, and during segregated Jim Crow era. This is not a good place to live in general if you're black and living in the United States. It's amazing to me to think of how is it that we are now reading Howard Thurman if we take into the broader context the background from which he comes. Black children are not allowed, as far as my understanding goes, during this period in our nation's history, to go to school past the 8th grade. And so Thurman, or at least it's not needed. So there's very little sort of motivation, social motivation for African American children to receive more education. He receives a scholarship when he finishes the 8th grade to go to a school that's not in his community. And as a result of this scholarship, he gets out of Daytona and he finishes high school, and he then goes to college. And after college, he moves up to New York and goes to graduate school, and he comes out, he's got his PhD. He's a thinker, and he starts teaching college. And he teaches for a while, and he has this influence. And while he's in college, this is where he met, in his undergraduate days, is where he met Martin Luther King Sr. He taught for a while, and then he moves to San Francisco and founds a church, the nation's first interracial and interreligious community. And then he pastors that for a while before moving and accepting a position as the dean of the chapel at Boston University, where he's the first African American dean of the chapel and teaches religion. He's a scholar of religion, and I made that designation on how that's different from theology. What we get in Jesus and the Disinherited is his first publication, his first book. So it's really early on in his thinking. It comes out in I don't have the book right in front of me. It's like, I think he writes it between 1935 and 1940, something like that. Maybe it comes out right around then as well. Still in Jim Crow South days. And what he provides in this book And this is an important distinction, and the primary reason why I use this in the Human Quest class is that he wants in chapter 1 to make a distinction between Christianity on the one hand and the religion of Jesus, what he calls the religion of Jesus on the other hand. And he wants to say these are two distinct things. For Christianity has been used by whites to keep blacks in their place. It's been used to justify the status quo. As you'll see in the video as well as in the book, he recounts the same story. His grandmother has this disdain or this distaste for the Apostle Paul in Paul's readings in the New Testament. And when asked why, when he was a kid, Thurman received this sort of very poignant sort of response from his grandmother. And his grandmother said, when we were slaves, every once in a while, our master would allow a minister who was a slave to hold a Christian service for the slaves. Or if, I might be getting this wrong, the master would bring in a white minister. And whenever the white minister would come in and hold a service, the sermon was always the same. It's generally around the Apostle Paul's statement about slaves be obedient to your masters as unto Christ. So here we have a Christianity that's undergirded, that undergirds the status quo for those who are in power in society. What Thurman does is he says, I don't want to, this is in the first chapter, I don't want to talk about the Christ of Christianity, that dogmatic, doctrinal person of the Trinity, anything like that. He says it's not that I'm rejecting the idea of Christness, Messiahness, right, this Savior person. But he says we can't fully understand who that is until we first really grapple with who Jesus was in his social, political, religious, economic context. Because that's the context that helps us make sense of the exaltedness that Christian doctrine has claimed over the last couple thousand years. Let's not jump to the spiritualization of Christianity. Let's wrestle with what it means to take seriously the fact that Jesus was a Jew, that Jesus was poor, and that Jesus was the subject of a persecuted person within the context of a larger empire imposing itself on this subjugated people. Does that make sense? So then in the next chapters, and I didn't have you read all of them, you can select one of the middle chapters to read, Fear, Deception, or Hate. He's writing these chapters not to me, not to someone whose back is not against the wall in the ways that his back is against the wall in society. He's writing it to show fear, deception, and hate are survival tactics for the disinherited. These are subhuman conditions in which people have to adopt these things, or at least the temptation to adopt them for mere survival is in the center to which all other things revolve around survival. So when we talk about ethics, when we talk about justice, we can't talk about it on equal footing as if we're all on the same level playing field, as if we all have the same center. For folks whose daily livelihood is always at stake, right? Survival is in the center, and all of the other stuff has to make sense around that. Or it doesn't even get considered in a certain way, because survival becomes the most important part of the ethic. So fear, deception, and hate has dynamic anima within them to help the disinherited guard against moral disintegration, physical disintegration. implosion. But ultimately, fear, deception, and hate will dog the footsteps of the poor. It will consume them, right? Because they can't be contained in the ways that they promise at the beginning. And read through those chapters, or the one that you select, with that in mind. And then he gives us his last chapter, the love ethic, which is not just let's hug each other and everything's going to be fine and we'll sing some campfire songs. No, this is he calls it fellowship. He says contact without fellowship, right, is what leads to hate. What leads people to be able to hate each other, where there's contact. So I'm driving on the road and I don't have any fellowship with any of the other drivers around me, and so I can be as angry at them as I please, as long as my windows are up. Contact without fellowship. He wants this love ethic is true fellowship. What do we need to do as a society? And I think his question is still relevant today, and so I ask you all to figure out how it's still relevant today. To maintain, to build, to sustain true fellowship in the midst of our differences. All right. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy Howard Thurman.